We are born free.
And we will die free.
The time in between, though,
that's complicated.
In that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Finding Freedom right here on the Lions of Liberty Podcast Network. Great to have you with me. It is Tuesday, July 15th. If you're watching the live stream on X, great to have you here. This will be published to YouTube and Rumble as well as the audio in a couple of weeks here. So if we do reference some current events, keep in mind this is being recorded on July 15th. Before we get started, before I introduce my guest for today, I do want to talk about my favorite coffee, Fox & Sons Coffee, owned and operated by my good friend, Stephen Fox. I'm actually drinking a cold brew right now from Fox & Sons. I love it. Drink it every single day. If you would like to save some money on some Fox & Sons coffee, you can go to FoxN, it's a letter N, sons.com, and you can put promo code John in for an order of $40 or more, and you'll save 15%. So go check it out. Support a great entrepreneur, someone who has probably a lot of similar values and principles to you. He loves freedom as well. Okay, let's get into it today. Really important topic. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. I'm bringing in an expert in all things AI, Brendan Steinhauser. He is the CEO of the Alliance for Secure AI. He brings over 2 decades of experience as a strategic communicator, political campaign leader, and media commentator. Before co-founding Steinhauser Strategies, he's managed high-profile political campaigns, including Senator John Cornyn's re-election in 2014, and served as National Director of Federal and State of FreedomWorks and organized the 2009 Taxpayer March in Washington. So, Brendan, welcome to Finding Freedom.
Thank you for having me, John. I'm glad to be here.
Great to have you here. And, you know, on almost every podcast I have, no matter who the guest is, it seems that AI almost always comes up. Everyone has an opinion on it today. I think everyone's excited about it, but also a little worried about it at the same time. So when I saw your name come up and what you're doing with the Alliance for Secure AI, I definitely wanted to have you on to have this discussion. So before we get into the details of it and talking about policy and things like that, if you could just maybe introduce yourself a little bit more to my audience and talk about really what brought you into this field.
Sure. Yeah, I have a long history and an interest in things like theoretical physics and the future and astronomy and those sort of things. But I majored in government, so I'm a liberal arts student with an interest in these other topics, and I've just always read everything I can about them, and it's always been in the back of my mind as some of the most fascinating topics known to man. But academically and professionally, a lot of my career has been in studying government, international affairs, national security, that sort of thing. So my work has been mostly on the strategic communications side, running political campaigns, working with members of Congress, including former chairs of Homeland Security, House Foreign Affairs Committee, and those sorts of things. But this topic of kind of AI and the future that's coming very fast has always kind of been in the back of my mind. But it turns out that I had a colleague from graduate school at the Institute of World Politics in DC, who was someone who worked at the Pentagon, who led AI strategy and policy there in the first Trump administration. His name is Mark Beal, and he called me up about a year and a half ago and said, "Hey, I really want to get your help on something. I know you've got a background on Capitol Hill and in politics and in strategic communications. I'm working on AI policy. I'm working on trying to spread the message about some of the potential downsides and risks related to AI he talked about how he had seen things firsthand. He was close to kind of what industry was doing. He was close to what government was doing. And he kind of saw a huge disconnect between DC and the Bay Area of San Francisco, Silicon Valley. And so he brought me in about a year ago and gave me a memo to read. And I remember looking at this and being somewhat skeptical about what it was predicting over the next 2 to 3 years. But having read a bunch of books on the topic, including Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity is Near, and his updated volume, The Singularity is Nearer, I was at least exposed to a lot of those ideas. I've been thinking about those ideas, but Mark made the case to me that things are rapidly advancing on an exponential growth curve, and that the next 2 to 3 years are going to be really transformational if things go in a way that we think they could go. So it really kind of grabbed my attention. And so I had been working on all sorts of policy areas, whether it was education or healthcare, national security, all sorts of different issues as a communicator. But I said, this is something I really want to throw myself into and really do more of. And one conversation led to another, and I ended up talking to some folks who were interested in starting a new organization with an express purpose and explicit reason for being one to communicate about the advancement of AI and what we should be thinking about. And so I started the Alliance for Secure AI about 6 weeks ago. I'd done a bunch of work leading up to that, a lot of reading and studying and networking with people, both in industry or former industry people, but also people in government and academia. So I've been reading a lot about it, thinking a lot about it, and we started this organization to basically try and communicate about not only the benefits of AI, but potentially some of the downsides and the risks. And so our approach is basically to spread the word through earned media, through paid media, digital campaigns, and identifying messengers who can go and talk about this issue set in a way that has a lot of credibility and can really answer a lot of those questions that people have about this. Final thing I'll say on this is just, I think that my experience so far has been that people are thinking about AI quite a bit, to your point. Certainly, movies, popular culture have had a big impact on how they think about advanced AI in the next few years. And I think some of my, colleagues and friends and others would say that there might be some elements of truth there. No one knows for sure, but there's also probably some things that might be distracting or misleading or that sort of thing. And so I think one of the things the community of people that I work with wants to do is really provide some the best information that we have to people who at least have a concern about this, who have some latent fears, and really try and educate them on what we know. And of course, the big thing is, look, nobody knows for sure what the future holds. Anybody who's intellectually honest will tell you that we're entering a I hate to use the term, but we're entering a brave new world, and we'll see whether it's a good future or it's a future that is bad, or perhaps a bit of both.
Yeah, I think anybody who's speaking with complete certainty about how the future is going to unfold here, like you said, even in the next 2 or 3 years, I think, but I don't think anybody knows. There's a lot of uncertainty there. But let's talk about some of these issues, some of these concerns, risks around AI, especially when we talk about what kind of role maybe the U.S. government should have with AI. So like what kinds of safeguards, both domestically and also, on the world stage, what kind of role should the U.S. government, do you think, have in regulating and, just in general, setting standards for AI?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that my kind of first principle here is that government exists to protect life, liberty, and property, or the pursuit of happiness, if you will. And I think that we have to start there with those basic principles. And so whether it's the federal government or state governments in this country, I think that when they're thinking about AI, they need to think about protecting those things. They need to be thinking about putting those first principles first. Look, I think that like in any industry, you don't want to be ham-handed. You don't want to have an approach that is disproportionate to the threat that you face. You want to be targeted and narrow where you can. You want to have safeguards in place that tackle the problem head on. It's hard to avoid unintended consequences, but you want to think about those. You want to avoid those if you can. And so I think that those first principles are really important. And then kind of just another thing that I think about is one thing that does concern me is potentially, big tech and big government sort of getting together and colluding in a way that restricts our freedom, restricts our prosperity, restricts, what it is we're supposed to be doing, living our lives and human flourishing. And so I do worry a little bit about that as well. So if we start from those principles, then I would say, I think one thing that I would like to see, and I have seen a little bit of so far, is states coming up with ways to have safeguards that protect people, protect their citizens from AI abuse and harms. For example, I split my time between Austin, Texas, and Washington, D.C. And here in Texas, a couple of weeks ago, the governor signed a law that had some protections. And it was really interesting because it prevented the state agencies from using AI in a way that would take away our freedom. It would prevent agencies from creating a social credit system. It banned, bias and discrimination by agencies against people who were using AI. So it kind of put some safeguards in place, safeguards on government, which I really like because it's sort of that, going back to the founding fathers, it's sort of that approach of putting limits on government and government abuses first and foremost. I would also say, though, that, again, anybody that watches how big tech has operated over the years has seen that they're going to operate in their self-interest. We expect that. We understand that profit motive is a very powerful thing. It's what they're meant to be doing. But I would like to see big tech companies, the ones that are developing frontier AI, sort of that next level of advancement in AI, I would like to see them voluntarily do things to secure the technology, to up their own physical and information security at the labs so our adversaries don't steal it. I would like to see them implement kind of a defense in-depth approach where you have multiple layers of security. In case something goes wrong, you have another fail-safe and another fail-safe. We would like to see them do testing and internal audits and bring in external people to come and audit the technology, because I think a lot of those potential dangerous capabilities are going to emerge in those labs, and we need them to be responsible and to, report that to each other. They need to be, tracking some of these developments so that if an incident occurs, they can contain it. So I'll start there and say, those are a couple of basic principles, is that I'd love to see, big tech kind of regulate itself first and do the right thing, although I'm somewhat skeptical about that. And then I would like to make sure that whatever we do protects life and liberty.
What about with regards to competing nations? What China is doing with AI, what Russia is doing with AI on the world stage? What sort of role do you think the U.S. should have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer the question kind of directly first and then go to some extrapolation. But
Sure.
I think one thing we should be doing is imposing export controls on our most powerful semiconductor chips. Just recently, unfortunately, NVIDIA was able to lobby to get their chips, their H20s, into China. There have been attempts to prevent the export of those chips and other powerful chips like the H100s. And so I don't think that's going to be good for the American people. I don't think that's going to be good for American companies. And I don't think it's going to be good for liberty, both in America and abroad. And the reason I say that is, you have the Communist Party of China that's been in power since 1949. They want to dominate the world by 2049, their 100-year anniversary of the regime. They understand that powerful AI is a great way to do that. And if they develop what's called artificial general intelligence, AGI, that is a way that they could really get there. If they get there before we do, or they steal our technology and use it to uphold their authoritarian state, their police state, and then perhaps to export it to their allies like the Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans, and others, now you can see a world that becomes built more on the model of authoritarianism and perhaps totalitarianism, as opposed to one based on liberty. So I think restricting China's access to our technology is really important. If we're going to be in this sort of an almost inevitable race, which I think has some potential downsides, I think that we should limit the Chinese government's access to those chips. So export controls are really important. And there is a bill in Congress called the Chips Security Act that is kind of making its way through Congress to look at that.
So you mentioned a term there, artificial general intelligence. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, there are a few different definitions that I could pull from the companies themselves or outside observers, but essentially, artificial general intelligence, or AGI, refers to an artificial intelligence that is cognitively as capable, as smart as any human in every domain, every intellectual domain. So think about, it's a PhD in every subject matter, and it has agency. It can sort of plan and plot and execute steps. So you can tell this agentic AI to go and do a certain number of tasks that are part of a larger set of tasks. In other words, managing a project that takes days or hours or weeks or months or years. So it's sort of acting on its own with more agency and with less direction and less prompting. So currently, most of the chatbots we're used to, you prompt them, they give you something back. But we're talking about AGI being essentially something that's not only smarter than any human on pretty much every subject, potentially smarter than the sum of all humans on every subject, which is now you're getting into artificial superintelligence, perhaps. But the idea is that AGI and ASI would be operating in the world, mostly of the digital world, but eventually with robotics, potentially through the physical world as well. And so it's a next level technology. Some people think we'll never get there. Some people think we'll get there in 50 years, but a lot of people think we're going to get there in the next 2 to 3 years, perhaps 5 or 6 years.
So what can be done to mitigate that threat from incurring damage against the human race?
Yeah, that's a great question. The short answer is we have to make sure that AI is aligned with human values. And again, I understand that word is very, there's a lot there to unpack. Whose values, what values, right? What moral system are we talking about? But the goal of alignment is to ensure that we control the technology. It doesn't control us. When you get into something like AGI, though, or artificial superintelligence, ASI, the threat is that these entities are potentially 1,000 times smarter than any human. They never sleep, they never eat, they never rest, right? They're just working constantly. Potentially 100,000 times smarter than us. And so the danger there is that if you just think about it logically, you're creating an artificial intelligence that kind of looks at a human being in the same way that we look at ants or snails. And I think that's a potentially really dangerous proposition. And so if we don't get alignment solved, and by the way, no one has solved it, and there's no argument by anyone in industry that they are even close to solving it. But if we don't do that, then it's kind of just, the probability of something going really, really poorly for humanity goes way up. And again, there's this idea of what's called P-doom. It's kind of the probability of doom, right? And so people try and figure out, okay, what's the likelihood of something like this happening? Some loss of control that leads to human extinction, perhaps. And there's all sorts of numbers that people come up with. I'll give you Elon Musk's number because he's obviously very prominent with XAI, and also just as a technologist and the world's richest man. He's given a number of potentially 20%. That's 20% likely
high.
that we'll develop a technology. It's very high. It's like, would you get on an airplane if you knew the chance of it crashing was 20%? Would you ride in a car if you knew the chances of dying were 20%?
Yeah, that's crazy. That's scary. Now in that context, it's a 1 in 5 chance that the AI is going to cause the end of the human race and maybe the whole world here. So you talk about values and ethics and using that as a framework to, I don't know if control is the right word, but to harness AI to get alignment. I think you used that word. And you've written about this. And the Pope recently, Pope Leo has come out warning about AI. So what type of role do you think religion, Christianity, has a role in helping to build that framework?
I think we Christians have a huge role in building the framework, whether it's Catholics, Protestants, non-denominational of some sort or the other. I think we have a role to play. I think that if we don't, then the values and morals and ethics that will be used to build out AI will be the values of a handful of people in Silicon Valley who don't share those values. I think we've already seen some evidence of that with simple things like bias and discrimination against conservatives or libertarians or Christians. We've already seen some of that coming out of Silicon Valley. But to take it the next step, the thing that really concerns me is when you look at some of the comments that have been reported out of Silicon Valley from some of these builders of AI. there's a weird sort of mystical component to this where we've actually seen people like Larry Page, the former CEO of Google, and others refer to the fact that what they're building is a machine god or a digital god. Now, to me, that's idolatry, that's blasphemous. It's the absolute opposite of what we want to see happen with this technology. And I think that they actually believe that's what they're building, that they're building something so powerful, so smart, so intelligent that we almost will have to and want to worship it. Now, that's something that is obviously completely counter to the basic tenets of Christianity, or really the basic tenets of any major religion. So I think that's it's a real problem. It's frightening. It's something that I think Christians need to understand, that some of the people building this technology want to create an entity that then we essentially give all of our power to, all of our agency to, and that we worship. And I just think for myself and for many other people I know, that is a non-starter and will never succumb to that. But I think we have to understand that there are some people that are building this out, and that is exactly what they want to see.
That's scary. So the people who are actually in control of these algorithms, some of them, not all of them, are actually have the intent of creating this super intelligence, godlike entity. That's wild. Okay, so let's talk about solutions. Let's talk about how people can actually, or how your organization can actually take these concerns and put some maybe either policies or legislation, or I don't know if it's people rising up through activism to put some constraints on AI. So how does this all work?
Yeah, I think that, again, going back to like first principles, I really want to see the labs do more themselves. And I do believe public pressure can work. I think the more we expose this for what it is, you can see potentially some of that behavior changing. We've already seen that with what big tech companies have done as it relates to Congress and politics in general. They're starting to kind of walk away from some of the things they were doing that was, censoring conservatives, censoring Christians and libertarians and others that they didn't see eye to eye with. So I do think public pressure can have an impact. So that's one thing we can all do, is speak out about this and say, we want you to take these measures. We want you to have better safety and security at the labs. We want you to do the testing necessary, the red teaming necessary to see what these dangerous capabilities are and to fix them. So I think that public pressure is one big thing. The other thing that we want the companies to do is to fund alignment. We want them to put more money into safety and security and alignment, and not all of their money into just developing this artificial super intelligence. So if they will fully fund their own capabilities in terms of trying to solve this problem, that could go a long way to potentially helping us get there. So funding safety and security and focusing on alignment, that's something they can do on their own. And I think the American people can express that and say, if basically we want you to do that, and if you don't do that, yes, we're going to look to our elected officials to hold you accountable. So how do we do that? There's all sorts of different ways. There's encouraging and requiring potentially transparency and accountability. One of the most important things that has happened from industry is that people have left those companies and have blown the whistle on some of the lack of safety and security measures. So I think protecting whistleblowers is an important thing that Congress can do, and there is a bill to do that. I've already talked about export controls as another measure. That relates more to foreign adversaries, developing AGI and ASI on the back of American companies. So that's an important piece of this. But I also want to say, I think it's important that we allow states to also be the laboratories of democracy that they're meant to be, to assert federalism and the 10th Amendment, to say, look, we want to protect our citizens. We want to protect our people, children in particular. And so we're going to be able to legislate. And I don't think Congress should tell the states that they can't do that. Recently, there was an effort by Congress to try and tell states that you can't legislate on AI for 10 years. Well, in 10 years, the whole world's going to be very different if you believe what the pioneers and the industry experts are saying about AI.
Was that,
go ahead.
That was originally going to be in the big, beautiful bill. So that was removed? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So it was a provision in the one big, beautiful bill. There was a kind of a battle, if you will, where a bunch of organizations, mostly those that are focused on protecting children from harm online, kind of fought that with the help of people in the Senate, like Senator Marsha Blackburn and Senator Josh Hawley and others, who were able to remove that provision. But we expect that provision to be up for debate very soon again. So we need the states to assert the 10th Amendment, assert their principles of federalism and say, we want to maintain the right to protect our citizens from potential harms. I think states, especially like Texas, I'm a little biased being a Texan, but I think that Texas got it right. And I think other states can do similar things to protect their citizens from those harms. There's a lot of more work that has to be done. But I think that, as you well know, it's very difficult to get sort of a big package of legislation to go well. It's probably going to be better if we do narrow, targeted legislation on each issue one at a time.
Yeah, we might need to get a friend of the show, Michael Bolden, with the 10th Amendment Center involved here. That's a
Absolutely.
great organization.
Absolutely. I think that is a key argument that resonated with a lot of state lawmakers and governors and attorneys general who actually signed letters and sent them to their congressmen saying, yeah, we got elected to do this job. We have a right and a compelling state interest to protect our people in our state. How dare you tell us we can't legislate on AI for 10 years? That's a total big tech giveaway. That's all that is.
Mm-hmm. So, you're pretty plugged into, I think the temperature of, how people feel about AI. Are they worried? Are they not worried enough? Do you think that in general, but we'll just keep it down to the U.S., that the U.S., the citizens of the United States, do you think that people understand really what's at stake here, how much of a threat this is?
What's interesting? I really do. And I think I've had a lot of just sort of conversations with friends and family and colleagues and former colleagues. And I had no idea what people would think about some of this stuff because it was the kind of thing I read about and, maybe talked about with a handful of friends. But the more that I've been doing media interviews on this, the more content we've put out, and you kind of see that feedback come back to you, the more hopeful I am, because I do think that the vast majority of Americans are concerned about this. They have this latent fear in the back of their head about what could go wrong. I think they have an intuitive understanding of, this idea if you create an intelligence that is far smarter than you and faster, that it could lead to a bad outcome. And it's one thing for me to share anecdotes, right? But I'm a data-driven decision maker, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at the surveys, the polling data that's publicly available, it also comports with these anecdotes. People of all political stripes are concerned. Conservatives, liberals, libertarians, moderates, centrists, socialists. And it's kind of quite striking. In fact, on the moratorium fight, you had all these like interesting, strange bedfellows who came together from the left and the right and the center, kind of just united on different reasons and different ideological backgrounds, but they kind of came out and said, whoa, we don't want to do this. We want to make sure that we reserve the right to protect people from this. And so I'm hopeful that that we'll get more and more momentum on this issue as people kind of feel more confident talking about it.
Right on. Well, unfortunately, we are about out of time, but we'll have to have you back on down the road to dig more into this. But before I let you go for today, tell people where they can learn more about the Alliance for Secure AI and where they can follow you and find your work.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity, John, to be here. Really appreciate the chance to speak to your audience. Our website is secureainow.org, secureainow.org, and you can find us on all the social media platforms, Secure AI Now. So thank you for having me on the show and look forward to continuing the conversation.
All right, Brendan, thanks for coming on the show. I will be sure to link to that on the show notes page so people can find it there at lionsofliberty.com as well. Thanks again, Brendan. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, John.
All right, that is a wrap for today's show. Incredibly important topic, and some of those things, the P20 from Elon Musk, that basically the human race could go away because of AI. That was an eye opener for me. I do think this audience, people who watch this show, definitely have an understanding of what's at stake with AI and how critical of a threat some of these things are. So definitely check out Brendan's work. Check out the show notes page at lionsofliberty.com to get all those links. One more thing before I let you guys go. As you know, we have a new show here at Lions of Liberty called Politics, the Politics Podcast. Tick, spelled like the blood insect, Tick. Please go subscribe to that standalone feed. You can get it on the Lions of Liberty Network. We're trying to build that feed, so go subscribe there as well. Support myself, Williams, every other Friday on the Politics Podcast. With that being said, that's all I have for this week. I'll see you all next week. So in the meantime, always remember to keep your head up and those fires of liberty burning.